I appreciate being put in the position of honor and having the last scientific say of the event, so hopefully I will do everyone proud. So today I'll be talking actually a little bit more broadly than what Chris just said. So my actual work is on urbanization, but urbanization is just one of many things that humans do that impact wildlife in a behavioral sense, in a genetic sense, in all sorts of senses. And so I wanted to kind of take a step back and look and kind of do a broad perspective of all the things that we do that impact wildlife. So specifically, I'm kind of looking at humans as a selection pressure, something that drives evolution. And evolution is something that we've been talking about doing for the last few days, and so I think we're all comfortable with the idea that what it results from is the fact that some genetic variants are going to be more successful than others. And one of the big reasons for this is that the environment can be quite a challenging place. We have things like diseases and predators and weather events and all sorts of things. And under those different challenges, you'll have some of these genotypes succeeding and some will not. Now, humans can impact the environment in a lot of different ways, which I'll kind of talk about here in a minute. And we also, in some cases, are the environment. So if we've got gut microbes, things living on us, we act as predators. And so both directly and indirectly, we then are also having this selective pressure that these other events can have on animals and their genes. And this is important and interesting for lots of different ways, I think. But one of the big ones is the fact that there are tons and tons of us. So this is the number of people, and this is the year, and here we are, about 2012. And it's just expected to keep going and keep going. And humans acting as a selection pressure is nothing new. We've been doing this since we became Homo sapiens millions of years ago. But now there are so many of us, and we are in so many environments. Even the most pristine environments, we're there as well from a kind of distant way with these climate changes that we're impacting. We have this amazing effect then on wildlife. And I think it's just really interesting and important for us to think about those effects that we have. So there are tons and tons of different things that we do, and I'm not going to stand here and list them exhaustively because it would take all day. But there are things like pollution, and I mean not just chemical pollution, this sort of stuff that we think about. Light pollution, noise pollution, which is actually what I study. Our presence in the habitat, so just being around or moving around, driving a car, walking past, that activity can bother wildlife. We have things like feral animals that we're responsible for introducing and other invasive species that we import and distribute around the environment. We hunt, as I said, we can act as predators. We have things like antibiotics and other chemicals, and I'll talk about that. And we're introducing these new things into the environment that animals have never been exposed to in the past. Farming and agriculture. So just a ton of different things that we do. And even if you aren't a hunter, if you're not a farmer, you still can be involved in these things because you buy food that's farmed, you take medicine, you probably own a pet. And so whether or not you want to, you are involved in these selection pressures. Now, the reason that that's such a big deal, that these pressures are a big deal for animals, is that, well, all organisms, I tend to default to animal and then to bird specifically because that's what I studied. So when I say those things, just extrapolate to organism. The problem with that is that these guys are adapted to their environments. So more or less they are evolved to work well in that environment. And as soon as that environment changes, then they might need to change a little bit as well so that they keep reproducing and having the kind of fitness that they need. So if we change the environment, then that means that they may no longer be adapted to it and they may not do so well. So sometimes what happens is you get things like this where the animal just completely disappears. So this is the gray auk, and these guys were very tame little animals that lived on islands. They never saw people before, they had very few predators. So when humans showed up and started clubbing them to death and yanking them and shoving them into bags and taking off, they didn't know anything better than to just sit there and let it happen. So they disappeared rather rapidly. This is another example of what you can do. This is a northern bobwhite. It's a species that I heard a lot growing up, but they don't like people. And so when people moved into environments, these guys just moved out. And now they only are found kind of in remote spots. where they kind of hole out for the places where people aren't going to come find them. So these are kind of extreme cases I'm not really going to talk about today because they don't involve heredity. Vanishing or removing yourself from a threat is not something that you can then really pass on to your young, and that's what we're interested in terms of evolution. There are some examples of kind of positive or neutral responses to people that do involve heredity. And there are some cases where evolution is actually not at play. And so I just want to mention those briefly before I move on, just so you're kind of aware of them and know that I'm not completely glossing over them. So the first is pre-adaptation. And that's basically the idea that you already have had some adaptation in the past that suits you to a certain environment, a certain thing that humans or whatever other stressor are introducing into the environment. So this right here is the eastern bluebird. That's the species that I studied when I did my master's and my PhD work. These guys are really happy living in human places, actually. They live quite often on golf courses, in your backyard, in cemeteries, parks, anywhere that's nice and open and grassy. And the reason that they do so well around humans is that they originally evolved to live in secondary successional habitats. So places where storms come in or fires rage through, the habitat disappears, everything starts and grows again from scratch, and it's a very rapid cyclical kind of process. So they have to always be on the lookout for new little niches to fill, and then as soon as those niches grow up too much and don't have the grass that they need, they take off again and find a new one. So they're very malleable and adaptive. So when humans came in and started changing the environment rapidly, it was really nothing new to them. It was the same sort of process, just in a slightly different way. And so they did quite well. And this is the kind of thing you see with a lot of species. House sparrows in some cases show this kind of thing as well. Another thing is plasticity. And actually you can be pre-adapted to have plasticity, but that's getting a little complex. But plasticity is something where, again, you have this kind of range of behaviors that you can display. Or actually, it doesn't have to be just behavioral, it can be genetic, it can be on lots of different levels. But here the idea is that there are lots of things that you can do, and if this is your range, you'll pick whichever spot in this range is suited to a given environmental circumstance. So these guys can all be exposed to noise. This is finch, house finch, red-winged blackbird, zebra finch, something else that we study at Exeter. And these guys, when they hear anthropogenic noise in the background, so when noise pollution comes along, they start singing louder, and they do some other changes as well to their vocalizations that allow them to maintain their ability to communicate. And then as soon as that noise goes away again, they stop singing quite as loud, and then that means they're not expending their energy unnecessarily and shouting at each other, basically. And this is something that happens over kind of both medium and short-term instances. So a car goes past, they get loud, and then go back down again. But also in habitats that are kind of louder on average, they're loud that whole time as long as it's kind of a bit louder. But then if you move them to a quieter spot, they drop back down again. So this is something that they fluctuate in real time. It's not an evolutionary thing. You can raise them in different environments and they will just suit themselves to that environment because they have this whole range that they can display. And these things are really interesting to study, but again, that's not a hereditary change.